most religious people want you to conform to who they are. I had to fight against so much religion when I first moved here because it's like the opposite of what we're trying to portray.
And I hadn't met you ever before because I had reached out to Shay and Rich, and they had something else to do in the afternoon. So you came in with Katie, and you came in in this like Fat Joe style long furred jacket, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, this guy is everything I think he is, like total judgment. And then he started talking, and I was like, you are an awful person for that judgment, Janice. Like, you are out here trying to preach that addicts are misunderstood and that alcoholics have a disease and all of this stuff, and like, look at you, what is wrong with you? So you get up, you start sharing your story, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so freaking powerful. Wow. Like, how in the world did you let yourself get so lost, Janice, that you forgot that you weren't the only person in the world that can do positive for somebody else?
This is my third taping of the day. Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode of the Resilient Purpose Podcast. Today we have a great talk between Janice McFarland and Tim Kraft, and the topic at hand is the intersection of spirituality and treatment in terms of how we work with addiction. And so I think it is going to be a very useful discussion for people listening to understand how we can incorporate both modalities to helping people recover. So enjoy.
So Tim, wanted to talk to you today about spirituality in recovery, myths, things that you have found to be true. Obviously, we're approaching it from two different lenses. I am not a person in recovery. You are a person in recovery. You've started ministries to help people based in faith. So I just wanted to have a conversation today about how you think spirituality fits into recovery. What's the role, how, why, when, all of that stuff. So
yeah. Absolutely.
I'll let you kind of kick things off, get us started, get the ball rolling.
Yeah, like for me, when I, so I wasn't really, before I went into recovery, I wasn't aware of another way except for the path that I took. And so I wasn't real familiar with a lot of 12-step programs. I wasn't familiar with like IOPs and all of that stuff. I just knew I was addicted to heroin, and if I didn't do something, I was going to die. So I went on the path, and it was all faith. The whole entire program was just the Bible, which for me, worked wonders. My recovery doesn't exist without my faith. So they coincide together. And so I found that what happens is, like the more I would research and I would read the Bible and I would like go deeper than just what it said on face value, I found that like even the Bible talks about drug use. It talks about pharmakia is the Greek word they use in Galatians and in Revelation. And that word is where we got our word pharmacy, which is in turn where we get drugs. So I found out that like it was a work of my flesh, meaning that I was gratifying what I wanted to feel better instead of building my spirit, which would then enable me to walk in freedom and not trip over myself. So for me, it was the the term spiritual awakening of finding God, more specifically Christ for me. And it changed my whole entire life because I found way more than just like freedom from drugs. I just found a whole new life I didn't even know existed.
Right. And I think people forget that, and I don't know if they forget, I just think sometimes people don't know that the point of recovery is to be free. Yeah. In all terms.
Yes.
Free from not just drugs, not just alcohol, but free from anything that binds you from like the utmost happiness that you can experience in your life. And that can come in all different forms. It's not just the chemical.
Yeah, I think that, like I always use this term that there's a difference between being sober and being free.
Right.
Like you can be sober and still be a miserable human being who has no purpose or no joy or no happiness. But for me, I've never been a person that did anything halfway. So like even when I jumped into my faith, I went in head first because, that's the way God made me. And it's actually a gift. I found out later on, it's not a dysfunction, it's a gift. And when I use it correctly, it's a very powerful tool. So I just learned that I was just using my gift the wrong way. I was using it for darkness instead of for him. And then when I just think that like, people think that the goal is to stop banging heroin in their arm when that's not the goal at all. No. The goal is much larger than that.
And to not put heroin in your body anymore, to not put alcohol, that's the side effect.
Yes.
Like the goal is something different. And if you reach the goal, the side effect will be that you don't need to do that anymore to
Right.
escape or achieve whatever was going on at the time. So backtracking what I know in your story, how long has it been? 5 years, 6 years, 7 years?
March the 1st will be 7 years.
Okay. I thought you were coming up close to 7. So 7 years ago, and I've heard bits and pieces of your story when I've asked you to come share in various forums, but did you go to Life Changers first? Like how did that go for you?
Well, I went, the way it happened, I had a friend come, I was almost dead in this little motel in Beckley, West Virginia, and I had a friend come rescue me out of this hotel. And he had been in this ministry called Dream Life. It was with Eddie James, who's a Christian music artist, but also has like a recovery program along with it. And so he suggested I go there, which was in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where I ended up going, not knowing, anything at all of what the future would hold. I had this idea in my mind that I would go there it was a year program. But I had, made up my own program. I was like, I'll go for 6 months. Right. And then I'm coming back home, and I used to work in the mines, and I'm like, I'm going to get my job back, and, life will be good. But it didn't turn out that way. Thank God. That would have not been, that wouldn't have been fun at all looking back. But so I went into the program, and, the things I was taught there were so life-changing, and they were like, it was like, all of this truth came flooding into my life, breaking off all of the lies I believed about myself. I believed about life in general. Like I was mad at the world. I realized I was mad at God because, of things that happened. And I just went through this process where I just was still, and I stopped, and I allowed God to really heal my heart from those hurts. I allowed him to kind of show me what my purpose was, and we get in a big hurry for those things, but I was there for a year, and it was the greatest step I ever took in my life.
So then you came back to the Mid-Ohio Valley at some point, yeah?
Well, the way it's such an odd thing how that happened. So I had became the director of the same program I had went through, probably a little too early, but anyways, I became the director of it at about a year and a half sober, and there was a person that Eddie James had met from Parkersburg. We had no ties to Parkersburg. He had we would travel from church to church all across the country, even across overseas. Yeah. And there was a guy who became the director of Eddie's ministry, and he talked Eddie into moving it from Atlanta to Parkersburg. And once we got here, within 2 or 3 months, I knew okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm not from this area. Right. I'm from southern West Virginia, so there was no ties to this area at all. But God put me here, and it didn't make sense at the time. But when I look back, I realized everything was planned, perfectly. Yeah.
So how long's High on Hope been rolling now?
We've had High on Hope for 4 years. Okay. We started it almost exactly 4 years ago from now. And before that, we had Dream Life. It was the same program I went through. We had it here in Parkersburg. We had men and women. We had about 20 people total in the program. And then High on Hope started as just an outreach. So we've been doing that for 4 years now.
I remember being very confused about what High on Hope was when it first came around, because it was so I couldn't. So 4 years ago, what was I doing 4 years ago? 4 years ago, I was in the middle of my very hyper-focused calling of working with the most severe drug addicts and alcoholics. I was running IOP day in and day out, live, breathe, die for these people, so committed to the work. And, all of my experience was from an education system, was from a master's degree, was from this very clinical, intellectual side of things. Luckily, I've met people in recovery along the way that have helped me understand what the balance is between those two things. But to add in this idea of a faith-based something that has to do with addiction and recovery was so foreign to me. It took me so long to understand. And I don't think I really understood what High on Hope was until I went to the first meeting when you were like, hey, Abby's sharing. You should really come make her anxious and watch her share because she hates this. And I was like, bet, see you there tonight. Yeah. So that was the first. And I left and I was like, that isn't still even what I thought it was, even after Abby had been explaining it to me and everything else. Like, I didn't really understand it until I got there. So what do you want people to know about High on Hope and a spiritual approach to recovery from addiction?
Yeah. It's basically like, I wouldn't say it's not a 12-step meeting at all. No. It's very much just a gathering where people will share their testimonies, and we also will always share like a message of some sort, because like as I read the Bible, it was very easy for me to see that like this was the greatest manual for recovery I had ever seen in my life. Just because it dealt with every issue that I was struggling with. And when I could personalize it, it made a lot more sense. So that's the way we try to approach High on Hope, is we try to, because to a lot of people, especially if they read the King James Version, they're like, I have no idea what this means.
Too many these and thys and thines and
So when I would read, I would see like the personalization of the Bible. And so I try to portray that message to people so that they can relate to it. I think that, one of the biggest problems even the church has is reaching culture. And so I think that if we can make a message that's relatable to the unchurched people, we have a much better chance. So I just kind of, refine that to be able to reach recovery people. And so that was kind of our approach on it, was like, not to knock anything else that anyone else does. Everyone's path is different, but at the same time, I know the liberty I found in my life when I truly surrendered. When I found out these spiritual things that could, when I heard things, and the Bible says you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And I would hear things like, greater is he that lives inside of you than he that's in the world. And that's referencing the Holy Spirit. So I would realize no matter what I'm going through in my life, I'm empowered to be victorious. So when that became truths, more than words, it moved past my head into my heart. I could begin to actually walk in that. So my passion was so much for other people. It's almost like when you find out, something new that comes out, like a new phone, and you just want to show everybody all the features the phone has. It was the same thing. I was like, I found this path, I found this way. I need to show everybody. And that was kind of the passion in the beginning of it all, was that type of mindset. The world needs to know, because 4 years ago, talking about Jesus alongside recovery, it was not popular at all. Now it's became way more common. But 4 years ago, it wasn't a big thing. But one thing I always knew, I'm like, this is my truth, and I'm not going to waver from it to please people either. Right. So I'm going to stand on my truth. Their path is their path, but I'm not going to be wavered by their opinions. I'm going to, I'm going to hold firm on what I know set me free.
I remember having, and I don't know if she shared it with you, but I remember having a really uncomfortable conversation with Abby one day. For everybody who doesn't know, Abby is his wife, about how untrusting I was of High on Hope, and skeptical I was of you when High on Hope started. Did she tell you about this conversation?
No, she didn't.
Okay. It was a really hard day, and it was work related, so I'm glad that she, boundaries. But I was sharing with her that, in all of my fever of what I was doing and how dedicated I was, I was hearing about what you were doing, and as a churched person, there was a lot of filters that got me there. I'm a churched person. I'm a baptized, born into it Catholic.
Oh yeah.
So I went to a Catholic church all my life, and that was my understanding of how people access God and the Bible and the message. It was you go to church and it's this very structured, these people go to ministry school and all of you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I was like, who is this joker?
Yeah.
What is this dude from Beckley talking about?
Yeah.
And then I would hear, and because anytime something is new, there's always an argument before there's acceptance, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when you guys came on the scene and brought High on Hope, I didn't understand how the two could go together, because again, I was taught how to do my job in the halls of higher education, where my ethics say that I'm really not supposed to bring my personal beliefs into things. And I'm not even supposed to tell you. Well, I was actually talking to Tyler about this a little while ago, that as a therapist, I'm not even really technically allowed to tell you what my spiritual ideologies are, because I'm supposed to be a blank canvas for you, just to splatter paint onto me. And so it was so strange to me that there was, from the very beginning, this identification of like dogma and theology and like, this is who we are. And so, you know, I would hear things and I would be so, because, you know, also in my mind, super egotistical. I was very self-centered at the time. I was so lost in the passion that I had for the work that I was doing that I couldn't see another way to do it.
Right.
And so everything everybody was doing was like wrong, because it wasn't me, which is, forgive me. But when I finally went to that first, and when Abby came to the agency and started telling me about it, no, it was before that. It was when we were at Warren.
Oh,
Remember we went out there for that PD day?
Yeah.
And I hadn't met you ever before, because I'd reached out to Shay and Rich, and they had something else to do in the afternoon. So you came in with Katie, and you came in in this like Fat Joe style long furred jacket. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, this guy is everything I think he is, like total judgment. And then he started talking and I was like, you are an awful person for that judgment, Janice. Like, you are out here trying to preach that addicts are misunderstood and that alcoholics have a disease and all of this stuff. And like, look at you. What is wrong with you? So you get up, you start sharing your story. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so freaking powerful. Wow. Like, how in the world did you let yourself get so lost, Janice, that you forgot that you aren't the only person in the world that can do positive for somebody else? And I think sometimes when we talk about spirituality, because I prefer to refer to it as spirituality instead of religion or any of those other things. Religion kind of has a negative connotation.
Yeah, it does.
And, you know, the point I think to make for people in recovery is like, if you find religion, great. But higher than that, like, I would like for you to find some type of spirituality, some type of spiritual connection with the power that is greater than yourself.
Yeah.
And because in my mind, the only reason you would talk about the Bible is because you're a pastor, you're a preacher, you're leading a congregation. So it did not they absolutely did not compute.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to bet that for most people in our area, it was the same.
Yeah.
Because we'd never been exposed to something so obvious, but not at all what our experience was.
Right. That was that was one of the things I had to really fight against when I first moved here is, you know, and that's one of the things that was beautiful about the ministry I went into, because, you know, most religious people want you to conform to who they are. And so I was never taught that. I was taught that you are uniquely you. You don't have to change, regardless of how much word you're going to spit out of your mouth. You can go just like this, and it's fine. And I'm so thankful for that, because you know, I had to fight against so much religion when I first moved here, because it's like the opposite of what we're trying to portray. The religious side is this set of rules and all these things. You're not allowed to do that. You can't wear a hat in church. You can't do this. You can't wear your hat backwards and talk about Jesus. And so there was all these negative things I had to kind of like battle when I first came. But I was like, but if I just stay authentically who I am, and I don't conform to, you know, what a religion says I have to be, if I truly stay who God made me to be, my chances of connecting with people are much greater than, and so I've always tried to be, you know, just stay like as much myself as possible. But you're right. I think it took years before people actually began warming up to High on Hope, because I think a lot of that too was, you know, these assumptions that were made. And also, Jesus don't look like that, you know, like that's not what it looks like.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, we had to fight through that, but.
And I think another assumption people made was like you said, like, Jesus doesn't look like that. You never showed up and said, I'm Jesus either.
Exactly.
But like, it is that thing that we do, like culturally, when you're trying to like create a cultural shift, we'll any grain of sand that we can hold on to keep from believing in something that forces us to change the way that we look at the world. We're going to hold on.
Anything that's unfamiliar, we have fear of. Yeah. And so if it's not familiar to us, we're always going to have fear, which is like why Christians are afraid of therapy, or why therapy is afraid of faith. You know, like there's these two things that the world, you know, says can't coexist.
Right.
When, you know, it's only the fear of the unknown. That's the reason we don't wander into those areas. And I think that, to see our community truly transformed and to see real change happen, those things have to be able to coincide together.
And I think everything has to be able to coincide together. Like, there are no walls and there are no no's. Because like you said before, everybody has a different path.
Yeah.
And as long as it leads you to the goal of freedom,
Right.
Is there a wrong way to do it? I don't think so.
Right. Because I just think about even, my wife, Abby, being an example of her path was so different than mine. Her path was straight 12 steps. And then she said she got to this place where, she just knew she needed more. And, she was just hitting these walls spiritually. And so at that point, she found Jesus. My path was the opposite. It was like Jesus from day one and through. But that don't mean my path was better than hers or, more right than hers. So I think that, and that's another problem we have. We're not patient enough with people's process.
Yeah.
So we try to force these ideologies on people because that's what we believe, but not realizing what we're actually doing is pushing them away. And so my greatest asset to be able to reach someone is the example I set more than the words I say to them. And so that's the way we try to, with our ministry, we try to not be forceful with it, because I know that it's not my job to be God. It's not my job to force him on people. It says the Holy Spirit draws men to repentance. It don't say Tim Kraft draws men to repentance. So I don't need to try to do his job. I just need to do mine and do what I'm supposed to do, and he'll do his. And I think that so often we try to expect people to receive something immediately when we don't know the traumas of their past. We don't know what, root issues they are dealing with. And we're not patient enough with God actually taking them through this process that could take longer than we think it should.
Yeah, because all the knowledge in and of itself isn't enough.
Right.
You can be the smartest. There's the big book has a sentence in it that says that there is no one, I forget the exact words they use because it was written in 1936. Paragraph gist of it is there's nobody too dumb to recover, but there are plenty of people too smart.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where faith, we have people that comes into our programs and they will try to figure God out. And because they're very, they're smart people, they're very intellectual, their mind rationalizes everything, and I get that, and I understand that, but that throws out the need for faith. The faith is the substance of things hoped for, or the evidence of things hoped for, the things that you cannot see, believing that it's going to happen. So it means that, I don't have to have every answer to every question that I have. It's not wrong to search, but I can't throw God out of the window just because I can't explain him.
Right. And there's, my personal journey with spirituality and all of, like I said, born Catholic, raised Catholic, my whole life. Haven't, denounced the faith or anything, but I'm not a very by the book Catholic. I'm not super good at being a Catholic. And that's kind of come from my experiences though.
That's what I was going to say. Religion is anything that celebrates form but denies its power. So, the AA book could become religion.
Yeah.
Because if it turns into just this list of things I have to do in order to be accepted or qualified, but denies any type of power greater than myself, that's religion. And so there's so many, there's so many practices that we can put into place, but miss the presence of the actual living God. And so I get that, and that's hard. So you got to break, especially if you're brought up through,
I am
like that.
My mom was my first grade teacher at a Catholic elementary school that I went to from Montessori all the way through 8th grade. I was very indoctrinated in the faith, and I'm very grateful that I was given those morals and those values and that viewpoint of me and other people and how we all work together. Very grateful for that. But what you just said about denying the power outside of, the list of rules, that's where things kind of took a shift for me. I watched so many people in absolutely hopeless, helpless situations create change that people were saying was not possible because these people will never be any different. They need to be shipped off and, you know, all kinds of terrible things.
Right.
I watched people completely change their lives. And how they changed their lives was they decided that they no longer had the power to change their lives. And so they then leaned on a power greater than them, something greater than them. They relied on that power, and then that power delivered them to freedom.
Yeah.
And where things really like opened up for me, because I spent a lot of time trying to understand, like, what is that power? What is this thing? Like, what is it? And then one day I woke up and I said, who cares? Who cares? I never have to understand. I never have to be able to define it. And I never have to be able to explain it to anybody.
Right.
Because the way that it manifests itself for everybody is so different. The term higher power, and I tell people all the time when they get kind of like iffy about the idea of a higher power or God, I'm like, listen, y'all, I use the word God pretty much anymore like a pronoun. God is an understandable term that most people know means a higher power that for the most part is looking out for our best interest, doesn't want bad things to happen to us. So I explain to people all the time, God for me is like a pronoun. And I still continue to use he, probably because I'm brought up as a Catholic, and so I don't use non-gender pronouns for it. But God, higher power, he, all of that stuff, these are all just kind of placeholder words. Because when I understood that I don't have to pretend to know what that is, I feel like my faith in that got greater.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's like, I think that's where it comes. It comes in letting go and just letting God kind of direct our path. And, you know, the right to know, letting that go is one of the biggest keys I think we can teach people to truly find it, because it's not how much knowledge you have. It's not how much or how hard you try. I just think it's how much you surrender and how much you're willing just to be okay with not knowing. And I used to always think to myself, like, like, I don't even know now what the next year holds ahead. I know it's going to be good, but I don't know exactly what it is. And it's okay. I don't have to know exactly what's going to happen. All I have to do is put my trust in God, and every day he'll direct the path. But most people are not okay with not knowing what's going to happen a year from now. And it's the same concept. Like, if I can't let go of my right to know, then I can never truly know, because I can't receive it, because then it's done in my will, in my understanding, in my timing, and the way I think it should be.
Like, because I'm out shoveling my way through the forest with like a butter knife, instead of just opening myself up to the possibility that there's already a path created for me right over here.
Yeah.
That is going to be much more rewarding to me, that I don't have to put the work in to create, because I'm joined with something else that's going to make it easier for me. There was a point in my life, I would say 3.5 years ago, where I hit a wall in my life. I was not happy. And I tried to lean into self-will and create plans for myself. And at some point, I just decided, like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it wasn't really done on like a faithful, like, giving over. It was like, this is exhausting. I'm just going to go on autopilot for a while, because trying to force my life to look the way that I think it should look is just too exhausting. I'm just going to take my foot off the gas, and just I'll come back to this when I have energy.
Right.
And by the time I had energy to come back around to it, an opportunity was created for me that I never thought I would have, let alone at the age of 29. So when I got out of my own way and just did the thing that was directly in front of me, things outside my wildest dreams happened for me. And I'm not saying that is going to happen to everybody, that like, oh, take your foot off the gas in your life and great things are going to happen to you. Because something interesting that one of my colleagues pointed out to me is that almost every miracle that Jesus works in the Bible, there is some amount of effort required on the receiver of that miracle.
Yeah.
So bathing in the Jordan 7 times, even when Jesus in the Bible is, going to towns and healing lepers, the lepers still have to come to where he is and reach out to physically touch him.
Right.
So the idea that leaning on faith and leaning into a higher power means that I don't have to do anything, stuff falls in my lap, absolutely not true.
Not true. I think that, like that's an easy cop out for people, but it doesn't take away the fact that hard work is required.
Yeah.
Like every day when I get up, I know that like if I want goodness to come a year from now, it's going to be based upon the work ethic I have now, how much I'm willing to put in, not knowing exactly what it is, but just knowing that I'm willing to do whatever it is. And I think so that's an easy cop out for people because, it's like, oh yeah, if you don't do anything, God will just throw everything in your lap. No, not true. God requires you to meet him halfway. And just be willing to. I think that they twist that. Like instead of saying, "Okay, God, you're directing my path," people use it as like, I can just sit at home and play PlayStation all day, and God will take care of everything. Put my faith in Him.
Yeah,
such a manipulative term, way to look at it with people, and so it's the hardest work to find His will on your behalf, to be able to, it's hard to surrender to His will. It's hard to go left if He says go right. It's hard to hear His voice and actually go the direction He wants you to go. But in the end of it all, you realize that is my best path to find success in my life. And so I think that and that comes in, for me personally, it comes in like being still and trying to hear Him before I make big decisions or moves in my life, and really praying and waiting for Him to confirm things.
And it's been my experience, and I have come to believe that, because I've heard all the time, sit back, listen for God's voice, listen to His message, listen for His direction, and like I'm not real good at waiting, but what I've come to do is understand that everybody around me is constantly trying to deliver God's message to me. So I hear God's message through the people around me.
Yeah.
The people around me are if I am His vessel, they are His vessel. If we are all created in His image, I can't put a limit on that. I can't say because we don't believe the same,
right,
you're not the same, and so I can't listen to a message from you.
Yes.
And so that's what I do for myself, because the idea of sitting back and listening for God to kind of, come and direct, I could very easily confuse my own voice and my own will with that message. And so I just kick back.
Yeah.
And I look at the people around me, and I ask people who I trust questions, and I find people who I want to live like, and I ask them like, hey, so what do you think about X? Or this happened to me. Do you think that was a coincidence?
Yeah.
Like I reach out to the people around me who I am taught to believe we're also created in God's image.
Right. And Jesus never said He would, I'll talk to you exactly in this specific way. So we have to be open to the idea, like, anybody can bring that to you. Like okay. A good example is for this other person last night. So last night I got a text message at midnight, and it said, got that gun smoke. And I was like, what in the world? And it was a number I didn't know, an Ohio number. And I said, excuse me? And they said, I got that fire, call me. Oh. So they text the wrong number.
Yeah.
And so I said, I think you have the wrong number. And then they said, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. And then I said, and then they said, who is this? And I said, this is Tim Kraft with High on Hope Ministries. We help people out of addiction.
Yeah.
And then they text back like, oh my gosh, I think this might be a sign.
Right.
So then I text back like, well, God, He doesn't do things on accident. So I think this is a sign. So long story short, I gave her, our information, actually talked to her today and getting her set up for treatment.
Good.
So Jesus spoke to her through what's the chances she go text somebody that helps people out of addiction that she has some fire?
Which,
and so,
for everyone who doesn't know, fire means drugs.
It means drugs, yeah. And so what's the chances that she would do that? And I'm sure along the way somebody gave her my number at some point or something like that, and she got them mixed up and texted the wrong number. But at the same time, and I told this back to her, I said, God is trying to reach you. If you can't see that at midnight, you accidentally texting someone who helps people out of addiction is not a coincidence, then I don't know what to tell you. And she basically broke down because she realized this is God's way of trying to tell her, you need help, and this is your way out. so he talked to her through a random text message.
Right.
He talks to you through people. He talks to you through circumstances. I don't think we can ever explain or try to understand how he's going to talk to us.
Right, and it's not like I only try to listen to God's message through the people around me. Like whatever situation I'm in, if I'm at church, if I'm with there is no situation where I should not be listening for his message because I'm constantly surrounded by people.
Yeah.
And if people are his vessels on earth, that means that there is no person that is not a potential carrier of his message. Yep. And so I have to remove what I think about you to be able to hear the message. And I'm so grateful that happened to me with you because I don't know. I mean, by the time Abby came to work for me and I got to know you a little bit like on a more personal level, obviously things would have changed. But before then, I was like gung-ho. I was like, heck yeah. And it was really, really upsetting for Abby to hear that like I did have some skepticism. And I said, but Abby, like that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Like everybody is allowed to be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I appreciate about the way that you go about what you do is that you have stayed always as authentically yourself as possible. And being authentically yourself means that sometimes your opinions and your outlooks change.
Yeah, so that's, because there was a time, and I remember being so condescending in this, when I was early in my recovery, I would travel with Eddie, and I would be at churches, and I would basically be like, 12 steps, there's only one step. And I would be so, not understanding.
Yeah, like that, passionately closed-minded.
Yes. So it was not a wrong passion, but it was directed wrong.
Yes.
And so as I grew and I learned, because that's probably why you don't give people microphones at 3 months sober. But as I learned and I became, more aware of everything, I became way more open-minded, realizing that, okay, that's your story. That don't have to be everybody. So I grew into that. But so on the other side of it, there would have been a time when I would have been like, you can't counsel, your way out of demons. You just need to go get delivered from them. And so I could see how on the other side, I could have looked at even what you did and been like, well, that's not the answer because that wasn't the way I went. And so I could see both ways. So it's very nice that, people are beginning to close both of those ideas of what they think it should look like.
And being spiritual does not mean that you will never be wrong. Being spiritual does not mean that you have been like downloaded the answer key for life.
Everything in every situation.
It just means that you have an extra tool for how to handle life should you choose to use it, because another concept in recovery is that you have to stay spiritually fit. The way that you have to stay physically fit, the way that you have to stay mentally fit, you have to stay spiritually fit.
Absolutely.
It's not like going to church one time. Me getting baptized at 3 years old did not make me a kind, caring, compassionate human being made in the image of Christ for my entire life. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a daily choice.
Yeah. It's the renewing of your mind every single day. And it's like feeding your spirit every day. Like because you can have these moments with God, and I've seen so many people do it, these feel good moments where they're like, boom, I'm free. And you are free. But there is a price to pay to sustain that freedom spiritually. And so every day you have to. Eddie James taught me this great principle when I was with him. He would say, what is spiritual maturity? And then the answer to that is it's the consistent application of 3 elementary things. Those 3 things are prayer, word, and worship. So every day I wake up, I have to pray. I have to read his word. I have to worship in order for my spirit to sustain the freedom that I found 7 years ago. So if one day I just decide to stop doing that, it's going to diminish, and then I'll be right back to feeding my flesh, because the spirit and the flesh are always at odds with one another. And before you know it, I'd have a needle in my arm. So.
Right. It reminds me of a Native American, I'm going to call it a proverb because I'm stuck in religious terms right now. It's absolutely not called a Native American proverb. But it's a Native American concept talking about how, again, paraphrasing, that every day inside of us there is a war between a white dog and a black dog.
Yeah.
And a little boy asks, well, how do you know which one wins? And the man says, whichever one you feed.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you want to
Yeah.
wake up and choose violence, you can wake up and choose violence, but you can also wake up and choose to be a better person than you were yesterday and to be a better person than you were when you went to sleep the night before.
Yeah.
And there are ways to do that. And it's different for everybody, just the same way that people get physically fit in different ways. Some people go to CrossFit, some people go to the gym, some people choose keto, whatever. There's a million ways to get spiritually fit, to get physically fit, to get mentally fit. None of them are wrong as long as they get you the outcomes that you want.
Yeah.
And don't compromise who you are as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's this everyday, battle that people have to face. And like, I wouldn't say battle, but it's like, first it's discipline, like in the beginning, I can think of the first year of my recovery every day. That was a discipline.
Yeah.
I wasn't used to praying. I didn't have this extensive background in, religion to know anything. I didn't even know any scriptures, not like, years ago. But then I would realize, like, okay, so I need to put this truth inside of me every day because the world's going to press in. And I'm not always going to have the safety net. And that's where a lot of people mess up in programs is they become so accustomed to, this every day somebody making you go, for morning processing and meditation and prayer. And every day somebody's making you do that. But then when they're not making you,
Right.
you haven't developed a discipline. So then, therefore, you're going to – but – the discipline eventually became desire. It became like I fell in love with God. I fell in love with who he is as a person, his nature, his grace, his mercy, his love. He put in my life. I fell in love with those things. And so it wasn't no longer a job. It became a desire. And I think that's what we have to teach people because like we were talking about earlier, we can teach people that they can just fight their way through this with this list of rules, or we can teach them to fall in love with the Creator. And that's where I think that the people that sustain it have developed a relationship with God, that they nurture every single day. Those are the people who actually, carry it strong, are the ones that develop that.
Don't disagree at all. And something that you were saying just a second ago triggered my mind to think about, like I've seen so many people get complacent. So many people do the same things they did in the first 90 days and think that those are the things that they have to do. Like it doesn't change.
Right.
It does change.
It does.
It should change.
You evolve.
Right. If you can't evolve in your recovery and in your understanding of how you live your life, there may be some circumstances, some environmental circumstances that you need to look at. Like if you are going to continue to live on certain streets in Parkersburg, certain areas in Marietta, certain parts of Beckley, we all know where these areas are in our communities. If you are going to continue to live in those environments, yeah, you have to live every day like it's your first day because it really truly is a battle, which is why looking at a person as a whole person with so many complicated facets, SAMHSA has the 8 dimensions of wellness that I love, one of which is environmental. So seeing people be able to get out of income-based housing, which there's nothing wrong with income-based housing. Right. But typically they're not the safest environments for people in recovery. Yeah. No shade. They need to exist. Yeah. But I don't necessarily want people who are trying to live in long-term recovery there unless they have evolved past every day is a battle living in this. Seeing people be able to move out of their income-based apartments, renting homes, buying homes in nice neighborhoods, and the kind of neighborhoods that they want their kids to just hop on their bike and ride down the street and be comfortable with that. Like that is also a fruit of recovery. That is also something that you are allowed to want for yourself. There's nothing that says that to be spiritually fit or to be doing the best in recovery, that every day has to be a downright all-out struggle.
Yeah, and that's, the thing about that is there's a story in the Bible that reminds me of this, because what you just said reminded me that so often people that come out of addiction, they set their standard of what their life should be so low, only because of their past. And there's a story in the Bible about the prodigal son. So this prodigal son, he gets his inheritance early. He goes away. He blows it all. He parties. He's out, eventually he has nothing left and he's laying with the pigs. So in his mind, and this is the way I think a lot of people in recovery see themselves. So when he went back to the father, in his mind, he said, can I just be your servant? I don't, feel worthy enough to be your son because of what I just did.
Right.
Because of my actions. And then the father was like, no, we're going to have a party for you. We're going to celebrate you. Go get the robe, go get the ring. And it's because of the trauma that he had just went through that he didn't feel worthy enough to be a son. He thought he had to be a servant. And I think so often in recovery that people think that they can only be the servant and not step into the inheritance that God has for them as a son or a daughter because they don't feel like they're worthy enough. And then, realizing that that trauma affected the whole family. You even had the self-righteous brother in this family that looked at the father and was like, you're throwing him a party and I've never did anything wrong. So why are you celebrating them? Realizing, number one, the trauma goes around the whole family. The father was affected, the brother, and the person out partying. But at the end of it, God had restoration for all of them. And I think that so often people in recovery see themselves as only the servant, not as, the son that can get the full inheritance of what God has for me.
Yeah, like they see themselves as the worst thing they've ever done.
Yes.
Not the potential on the other side.
Yes.
Which, if I think about it, and I heard a song by NF that I texted to Abby and Shay probably a couple months ago, and I was literally sitting there just bawling on my couch listening to this song because, and I do it all the time, as a person who works with a lot of people in long-term recovery, I absolutely take people for granted. I take Abby for granted. I take you for granted. I take Shay for granted. I have a coworker I take him for granted. Most people in long-term recovery, I take for granted because it's the potential, the way that they are living their lives now is so drastically different from what anyone ever thought life could be for them. That to me, it's like there could obviously not be another way for them to live.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is the side effect of being spiritually fit and keeping yourself connected to the things that keep you well.
Right. Yeah, and that's key too. I think that having a support system in place is one of the most important components I've seen. Anytime I see somebody that's connected to us and they begin to isolate, I am almost certain. And I ain't saying 100% of the time, but probably 99.8 that they're on their way to a relapse. Yeah. And it's because that spiritual family that you have, formed in your life, they are meant to walk through this with you. People that maybe don't understand, why do y'all do something like 7 days a week together with this big group of people? It's because
lots of people don't have anybody.
Yeah, exactly.
They burned every bridge.
Yeah, without that family, many people will not sustain their freedom. So, and including me, to me, it's important. I need that family in my life that can lift me up when I'm down, and that when I'm having a hard time, I can call them and be like, "Man, life sucks right now. I don't want," So right. I think that that's overlooked so often, and that lifestyle. And that's one thing I think that is so crucial for people coming out is for them to realize that they are worthy, they are accepted. And what's crazy is I think about. I feel like I cannot be the proper husband to my wife without the love of God. So, for example, I can't give her something I can't receive. So when I receive love, I can give it. And I think that when we teach people in recovery that same concept, then when they receive the love, they'll receive the acceptance. Then with the acceptance comes the affirmation that they believe they can be more than what they used to be. And then they begin to, when 2 Corinthians 5:17 becomes truth, those who are in Christ are a new creation. Behold, all things are new, old things pass away. When I step into that new identity that God has for me, which is like the prodigal son coming back, receiving the ring, receiving the robe as a son, I can truly allow those old things to pass away. But the problem is so often we want to hang on to those old things and we can never get fully what God has ahead of us because we're not willing to let go of this stuff over here.
Yeah.
And so we miss out on the fullness of life because of that.
The one thing I will never let your wife forget, though, is her maiden name. It's my favorite thing to joke with her about. I'm like, listen, I hired Abby Roach. I'm very proud of Abby Kraft, but I want Abby Roach.
Yeah.
She is very useful to me. So is this version, but like that's the one that put in the work. Do you know what I mean? This is the fruits of your labor, but like that's
don't
bold,
forget,
man.
Yes. Don't forget where you came from.
And like that story of the prodigal son with like, break out the robes, break out the rings, like let's have a celebration. Anytime somebody in treatment at the agency, and we don't do residential treatment, we just do outpatient treatment. I have no desire to run a residential program. Seems like a headache. Don't want it.
It's not easy.
At least now. Yeah. Maybe someday I'll wake up and be off my rocker and decide to do it. I've done that before. But when we think we've done a good job, or even when we think we've done a bad job, when people are like, F y'all, I'm going to cash in my days over at 101 Westview Avenue. I'm going to go do my time because I don't want to listen to you. What you're asking me to do is too much. I do not have the ability nor the desire to do what you are asking me to do right now, even though I know it's what's best for me. We're like, all right, have a great time. We're always here for you.
Yeah.
And when we mean it, we say it. And so when they come back, no matter what shape they walk in the door in, I am so overjoyed to see people when they show up to their appointments. Like I have stood in the lobby and hugged people while crying with them that they didn't die, and that they got a chance to come back and have a second, third, fourth, fifth. I don't care. As long as you're alive, hope exists. Hope only dies. You are only hopeless when you are no longer with us, and at that point it is not my job. You are in the hands of something else.
And I think that when we develop that within our agencies and our ministries, that heart's the one that brings healing. And knowing, like, okay, so we had this girl walk into the Reach building last Thursday, and she was twapped on meth. And but I love the fact that she was comfortable enough to walk in there, high on meth, needing help, knowing that she wouldn't be judged, that she wouldn't be, condemned for making a mistake because she had a little bit of time, previously. But I think that the fear of people, like thinking that they're going to be rejected, it's the fear of rejection most of the time why people don't come back. But when we can just like from the beginning, the hearts of everything we do have that love of Christ towards people, celebrate them if they come back on the 12th time.
I don't care, man. You can come in beaten, broken. We've had people have some episodes at the agency, and then when we say, okay, but are you coming to group tomorrow? They're like, I'm allowed back on the property. Why would you not be? Like that was a manifestation of your illness. Why would we are here to help. I will only if I am required by law will I tell you not to come back on the property and try to get better. That's just the opposite of the message that we're supposed to be carrying.
Absolutely. And I just think that that's community healing. That's where the transformation takes place is when collectively that's the heart. I also think, like when on that topic of community healing, I think that like when agencies can work with ministries and churches and all these things combined together, and I believe that that's truly the key to seeing like the Mid-Ohio Valley transformed is a unification of all of these facets, because there's roles that you play that I can't play and vice versa. And I just think that the whole package lies in the secret to, because I think about that a lot. I think about like one of the assignments I think God gave me was to like try to develop healing in communities and to see them transformed. And on the bigger picture of what we just independently do, what does that look like as a whole? How do we collectively attack this drug problem? And I think the Mid-Ohio Valley, for the most part, has done a very good job of that because we go to a lot of different communities. And what I see here, most communities don't have. Like we've done the Equip the City events in different places, and what we have in the Mid-Ohio Valley, most places do not have. So I truly do believe that we are on the right track as far as, like that unification that will bring a total healing in our community. Because
I definitely agree. And the visual that just came to my mind, and I'm sure it exists eloquently written somewhere, but there's a saying that like a piece of yarn, a piece of string by itself isn't that strong, but when woven together with others now becomes unbreakable or something of that nature.
Yeah.
And that's what I think. So you got sober in a faith-based ministry. You later created High on Hope, and then later had a partnership. I mean, you just said somebody reached out, and now you're working on getting her into treatment.
Yeah.
So what do you think clinical can bring to faith-based, and faith-based can bring to clinical? Like, how do we best bridge those gaps? How do they best kind of support each other's vulnerabilities and like celebrate each other's strengths?
Right. I think the first thing is on each side understanding what the other side offers, because there's, obvious things that like you as a therapist can bring to someone that me as a minister cannot,
right,
and vice versa. So I think the first step is this: the church needs to become more open to the clinical side of things, and then on the other side, I think the clinical side needs to be open, that like the faith component is very, very important also. And so I just think that when there is a understanding of what you're good at and an understanding of what the faith side is good at, we can both serve our roles. And because I don't think that only faith without the wholeness of the soul, like the soul is your mind, will, and emotions.
Right.
So therefore, that's where the clinical side comes in, because it attacks those things that are affected biologically by drug use and that goes on mentally in people's minds. And so I think that those areas have to be healed before the person can be whole. So it goes back again, like the prodigal son. There was a trauma. You attack that trauma. I don't necessarily attack that trauma.
Right.
But then there's the spiritual side of the emptiness that the person would feel, even with the trauma being,
like healed, dealt with,
up,
whatever.
There still needs to be, the spiritual healing that comes with it too. So I think that when we both understand what roles we play, then we can be successful.
And there are so many times that I've seen, like you were talking about before, when we get passionately closed-minded and we think that we have the answers, and so we're just so desperate to let everybody know what we think the answers are, and we're trying to fit everybody into this mold of like epiphany that we've had, we miss an opportunity to honor a person's individuality and what each individual needs. Like, nobody's a carbon copy. And as I say that, though, any client watching this, I still stand behind the fact that when you are in active addiction, you are number 101, 102, 103. Like, it manifests itself in almost identical ways across all. But that doesn't mean that recovery is the same for all, because every soul, every heart, every mind needs something different. And a lot of what clinical misses is like, you have the knowledge, you have the skill, you may even have the will, but there's still something in the way. Like, there's still, you can't use that skill in the moment, even though you desperately want to avoid the outcome. If there's something else missing, well, let's look at, Sam says, 8 dimensions of wellness. One of them is spiritual. And what our agency has done, kind of by happenstance and just a conglomeration of personalities, is we've created this, what we feel is comfortable, and hopefully clients feel it's comfortable too, this comfortable exploration of spirituality and a higher power, done through, mostly the lens of a 12-step program, because the way that the 12 steps defines what a higher power is, we very much identify with. But we kind of explore these spiritual ideals, and we say things like, I love you. And we pray together before we have a meal, clients and facilitators, everything. And we talk about God, and we talk about things that I was definitely taught not to do that. That was absolutely no. It was like burned in my brain, like, you could lose your license if you do that. So you better not cross the line. But understanding that, like, most of my failures as a clinician were because I wasn't looking at the whole person. And even if I was looking at the whole person and I saw that they had a spiritual gap, I didn't do enough to expose them to something that could help heal that spiritual gap. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's the same on the other side because, like, we could bring someone into the faith side of things and pray over them, teach them to pray, take them through whatever type of, process they go through to find spiritual freedom. But it goes back to then if that root isn't addressed, they will always live in the cycle.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like on both sides, because and it's very rare that you see a clinically minded person that's open to faith. It's just not a common thing.
No.
Like I've met many clinical people, and the majority of them are just more analytical in thinking.
Which is so ridiculous because, like, to even insinuate that faith and science are not congruent,
right? Exactly,
is ridiculous to me.
Think about a scripture and tell me if it's like, okay, modern science can explain it. Romans 12:2, it says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind," which means basically I have to rewire the way my mind works. And it says, so that you can prove what is this good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So there's a reason why you should do it too. But, okay, so when I think about renewing of the mind, they knew 2,000 years ago that, like there was something going on up here before we ever had brain scans or anything like that. They knew that we needed to change the way we think. But then science will look at it and you can see, like, and this, like someone in active addiction, the frontal lobe's very inactive,
basically dead.
Yeah.
See you later. We're just all on the gas, so not doing any thinking.
No moral decisions being made.
Yeah.
So, but you go back 2,000 years and you're like, well, they were referencing this 2,000 years ago. They were saying that I need to renew my mind, which renew, like it needs to be made new. I need to think differently. So the rewiring of my brain is a necessity in recovery because, like your thought patterns have this, like easy access, and it's your coping mechanisms and the way you deal with life. And you have these thoughts that just go through your mind of like something goes bad. Like when my sister passed away, my first thought was, I go get high. That's how I cope with this. Well, over time, I rewired my mind, and modern science can explain what the Bible was talking about 2,000 years ago. So I do believe they very, very much do coexist.
There's also I can't remember if it's in Proverbs or Psalms, but I'll find it and I'll send it to you. There's like 6 verses that actually describe an alcoholic, a person who needs to wake up in the morning and have a drink and the shakes and everything else. Like, it's in the Bible.
Yes. You know what else is crazy? In Genesis 3, the fall of man. Okay, so think about this. God put a boundary. He said, don't eat from that tree to Adam and Eve.
Right.
So Eve eats from this tree that she was told not to eat from. This is so interesting to me. I think of this in reference to the behavior of a drug addict. So after she ate from it, it says that then she brought Adam in. She talked him into doing it. So that's the way addiction works. But then after that, they hid from God.
Right.
So they hid away from the good thing in their life, isolated. So then a drug addict's behavior is to isolate. But then when and then they were shameful, so they covered themselves because they realized they were naked.
Yeah.
So first you start with, I'm going to bring someone into my mess and do it with them, because you never do it alone, very rarely.
Because if you do it alone, that's when you have a problem.
Exactly. Then I'm going to go isolate away from the good thing in my life and hide from it. And then I feel the feeling of shame. But then this is where it gets really interesting. When confronted by God, Adam said, it was her fault.
Yeah.
So blame.
Yeah.
And so every one of those traits is the same trait of a drug addict. Think about it. First, I do what I'm eating from the wrong tree. I should never be touching the tree of heroin.
Right.
But I'm eating from this tree. And after I eat from the tree, I isolate away from the good thing in my life. And then I'm shameful, so I try to hide.
Yeah.
But then when confronted, I usually blame. Tell me that is not the characteristics of someone addicted to drugs. And the Bible told us this, thousands of years ago. So what I get from that is this, that the fall of man is it's no different than I'm never supposed to eat from that tree. It's the same concept. My behaviors were the same as theirs when they did what God told them not to do. And so when I think about like solution-oriented ideas, there was also a solution to that problem. And God said he will send, his son to take care of the problem. So that was my solution. But I think it's so cool how you can relate, their behaviors to ours today and be like, okay, they were like, no different than being a drug addict. You did the same thing.
Yeah. And I think as the clinically minded person in the conversation, I think that the clinical side of things has missed a lot of opportunities. I think that we have not been as aware of holistic healing as we are now. And I think that we ourselves have been operating on fear in some ways in the way that we approach treatment in people. Because, I, maybe not verbatim, but the insinuation in my graduate program was if you touch someone, if you use affectionate language, and if you talk about God, you can get turned into your licensing board and you can lose your ability to practice your craft.
Right.
And so for the first couple of years, I said, absolutely not. And then I saw another professional do it and how powerful it was for these people who, by the way, nobody comes to treatment unless they are so irrevocably broken that they can't fathom putting the pieces back together themselves. Yeah. Like they come to us so broken and so disheveled and so confused and so unworthy. They feel so unworthy, so unloved. They do not have an accurate picture of themselves. And I tell them all the time, I say, listen, friends, if I could just take you by the shoulder, give you one good 8-ball shake, give you a hug, and then you would believe in yourself that you are worthy of everything that I see in you, I would do it every day if that's what you needed. But that doesn't equal up.
Right.
But I'll still shake you every day and give you a hug and tell you that you're worth it until you believe it yourself.
Yeah.
Because I have to build you up such that you can stand on your own. I tell people all the time, I say, listen, friends, I want to know you for maybe 18 to 24 months. I want to know you really, really, really well in the first 6 to 9 months. And then I want you to go live, and I want you to kind of use me as a check-in, like a sounding board. And then after 18 to 24 months, I never want to have to talk to you again. I absolutely would love for you to call me and tell me what's going on in your life. I want to run into you at the store. I want to invite you back to, recovery events that we're doing at the agency. I want to know you, and I want you to want me to know what's going on in your life. But I do not want you to need me in order to be well. Yeah,
and that's I think a key too is teaching people to stand on their own 2 feet. We don't teach that enough. In our own brokenness, sometimes we need people to need us. And I've seen that a lot in the church. You know, I've seen a lot of people that need to be needed, so they will almost keep you under their thumb just to get their own fulfillment in that area. Yeah, so,
and everybody is a person.
Yeah.
Everybody's allowed to make mistakes. There is never a person that you will meet that is not capable of letting you down and that won't let you down.
Yeah.
And having an understanding that there is something bigger than all of us is really helpful for moments when people fail.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to hold on to the moments that people fail.
Because we can't save people, only He can. So I think that's good. I like that.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap up today's conversation, science and faith are not opposite. Spirituality is whatever you make it, whatever your soul needs. Many ways to go about accessing it. And I would say it's vital to people's functioning in long-term recovery.
Yeah, I agree. 100% agree. I think without it, you're going to be a miserable human being. I don't think you'll find much joy outside of it.
And also spirituality and religion, very different things.
Absolutely different.
Spirituality, belief in a power greater than yourself. Religion, how did you put it?
I'd say it's a list of rules. It's a list. It's rules without power. It denies the power of God. It's just a list of can and cannots.
Yeah. So anything else that you want to add before we wrap up and let the people get on with their day?
I think I'm good to go. Thank you so much for having me.